The dust motes hang suspended in the afternoon light, catching the edge of the windowsill like tiny gold coins. They float down slowly, undisturbed by any breeze, marking invisible paths across the wan mahogany surface below them. What happens when the self becomes utterly dependent on external echoes? When our internal measure, the quiet reckoning with what we believe to be true, is consistently outsourced, left in the hands of others for confirmation. We live in a peculiar echo chamber of affirmation, where genuine self-knowledge seems perpetually out of reach. The deep requirement is not merely approval, but proof that the interior world actually exists. To understand this desperate hunger for validation, we must look to how identity itself has been constructed through relationship. The philosophical tradition points us toward thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre, who believed that existence precedes essence. Meaning, therefore, is not found waiting in some universal blueprint, but must be actively chosen and created by the individual. This places an immense burden on consciousness. If there is no preordained self, then every moment of action carries the weight of defining who we are. Our entire sense of self becomes a perpetual draft under public review. This continuous performance, this tireless effort to prove one's own worth, is not a sign of confidence. It is often a profound symptom of radical uncertainty. We seek validation because admitting that our current belief system might be flawed, or that our chosen life path might lead nowhere meaningful, feels like an unbearable void. It is easier and safer to ask 10 different people if we are behaving correctly than it is to sit in the silence with only ourselves. Validation becomes a social currency, traded freely for temporary emotional stability, a momentary cessation of existential dread. But this dependence creates a critical misalignment. The self that needs constant validation does not truly exist anywhere but within the field of other people's gaze. The moment we internalize that our value is conditional, that it depends on whether someone else smiles, nods, or shares an appreciative emoji, we surrender our freedom to define ourselves solely by consensus. We become reflexively responsive beings, reacting to perceived needs rather than acting from deep conviction. This shifts the locus of control entirely outward. This dependence blinds us to a profound aspect of human thought. That genuine self-authorship requires solipsism, not in the mystical sense, but as a practice of internal detachment. We must learn how to hold an idea or even a feeling simply because we perceive it, regardless of immediate feedback. To truly own a belief is to accept the possibility that no one else will ever understand it, or worse, disagree with it vehemently. This act of intellectual and emotional self-reliance is deeply counterintuitive in a hyperconnected world, designed for constant affirmation loops. We must cultivate what some call negative validation, the ability to stand firm in our convictions when faced with silence, disagreement, or outright hostility. It means learning to tolerate the discomfort of being misunderstood. It means accepting the fact that conviction is not synonymous with popularity. This skill does not build character overnight. It demands a continuous withdrawal from the expectation of ease. The struggle, therefore, is turning inward until the internal critique becomes louder and more reliable than any external praise or criticism. The dust motes still hang there in the afternoon light, catching those tiny flecks of gold across the wan mahogany. They are moving according to no discernible current, drifting only when they choose to fall, marking a path that belongs entirely to their own physics. The windowsill remains undisturbed by the rush of outside motion or the urgent need for them to reach the floor and prove their existence there. The self is not something to be validated into being. It is simply something that persists. And sometimes, persistence requires nothing at all but the simple ability to endure one's own quiet weight, without waiting for any echo to confirm its truth. The self is not something to be validated into being. It is simply something that persists. And sometimes, persistence requires nothing at all but the simple ability to endure one's own quiet weight, without waiting for any echo to confirm its truth. We mistake validation for nourishment, believing that external approval, the nod, the compliment, the achieved milestone, will finally sustain us like a meal. But these are merely distractions, shiny crumbs tossed our way by passers-by who have their own agendas and need nothing of our inherent value. They offer temporary warmth, perhaps, but they cannot provide structural integrity. We live in a culture that has monetized the self-concept, turning personal worth into a measurable commodity: likes, followers, achievements, certifications. We build elaborate scaffolding around our identities, ensuring every pillar is supported by some external agreement. If the engagement drops, we panic. If the accolades cease, we feel invisible. This creates an exhausting feedback loop of performance anxiety, where life becomes less about genuine experience and more about optimizing a public narrative. We become curators of our own highlight reels, desperately pruning away any moment that might reveal the messy, inconvenient truth of simply being human, a creature capable of quiet boredom, profound uncertainty, and unstructured, undirected time. The tragedy is not the seeking of connection. It is the conflation of connection with confirmation. We assume that if others see us, they must affirm our completeness. But authentic relationship does not operate on a system of meritocracy. True friendship, true love, even true self-acceptance are predicated on acceptance before achievement. They accept the quiet moments, the days when we cannot articulate what we feel, or when our greatest desires seem too amorphous to name. To practice radical self-trust is therefore to learn how to be alone with oneself without immediately scrambling for distraction. It means understanding that silence in this context is not an emptiness to be filled, but a vast, fertile space where the actual work of becoming can happen. It requires building a scaffold from within, a deep, resilient belief in one's own inherent right to occupy space, regardless of applause or criticism. This process is slow, almost geologic. It doesn't arrive in sudden bursts of epiphany. It accrues like sedimentary rock, layer by patient layer. We must learn to distinguish between the voice of genuine insight, the gentle whisper that says, "You are here," and the shrill, anxious chorus demanding proof. "Are you enough? Show us." We spend so much energy projecting an image for consumption that we forget the magnificent complexity of being simply present. We lose the ability to enjoy the sensory richness of a moment because our attention is perpetually fixed on the next required performance, the next necessary update. The joy becomes conditional. It must be documented to feel real. It takes courage to look at the raw material of oneself and say, "This is what I am right now. It is imperfect, unpolished, and entirely enough." This quiet declaration is revolutionary in a marketplace that constantly demands improvement and optimization. It is an act of profound refusal, a refusal to shrink, a refusal to justify the breath. And so we return to the window. The golden flecks continue their slow drift across the mahogany surface. They do not gather at the edge, waiting for a gust of wind or a hand to scoop them up and admire them in a pile. They simply exist on the wood, independent of any boundary or pull. Their value is intrinsic to their being gold, nothing more. The windowsill remains undisturbed by the rush of outside motion or the urgent need for them to reach the floor and prove their existence there. The self, like those flecks, must learn that its most profound beauty resides in its unforced state, in the patient drift across a surface it knows is solid enough to hold it, simply because it chooses to be.